Welcome to the Island Treasures mini podcast for caregivers. I'm your host and certified caregiving consultant, Allison Van Shee of Alongside Caregiver Consulting. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Cabin Teely Contractors in the Comox Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, where we care too. My goal for each podcast is to provide helpful information and resources to caregivers from the guests who share what they have discovered through their own caregiving experiences. Tracy Crump was the caregiver for both of her parents and then her mother-in-law, but we'll be focusing on her experiences with her mom in this mini episode. Being a former ICU nurse, Tracy had medical knowledge that perhaps helped her recognize that things just didn't fit with what they were being told regarding her mom's health situation. As it turns out, her mom had been misdiagnosed.
That sometimes Alzheimer's is not Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
It can be misdiagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I ever want to raise any false hopes with anyone,
Right.
but I do want people to know that that is a possibility.
As you heard, Tracy cautions that this may not always be the case, but it does emphasize the importance of advocating for your loved one and the importance of obtaining a complete examination when you start seeing symptoms that mimic dementia-like symptoms. For Tracy, she knew something wasn't adding up, and her worries kept her awake at night. So she used this time to pray. Then she remembered a friend whose father had similar symptoms to what her mom was experiencing. Hear how that recollection helped her find out what was going on with her mom's health.
Suddenly, a memory returned of a friend whose dad had the same kind of symptoms. He had started falling, and she had started falling, and just some of the other symptoms she had. And I thought, what was it his dad had? And suddenly it came back to me, 3 words that will probably make no sense to your audience, but it was normal pressure hydrocephalus. And I thought, And the next morning when I got up, I looked it up. She had all the cardinal signs of it.
So Tracy did her homework on normal pressure hydrocephalus, NPH, and took the information to one doctor, and then another, until she was successful in having her mom tested and receiving not only the diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus, but the treatment which helped her mom's symptoms lessen.
So we did have the test done. She did have normal pressure hydrocephalus.
Wow.
She had a shunt inserted,
Yep.
And she made an amazing turnaround. Now, she had gotten to the point where she could no longer walk. She could barely answer 1 or 2 words to questions. So no real conversation, no complete sentences. And she had no memory. I mean, her memory was nil. And within 3 days, she was making complete sentences. She remembered something an aide had said, 10 minutes before she walked out of the room. She never fully regained her mobility. She went through some very intensive rehab after that. But she did make an amazing turnaround. We had her for 3 more years.
So what exactly is NPH?
Let me just explain what normal pressure hydrocephalus is. You've probably heard of babies born with hydrocephalus, where they call it water on the brain.
Right.
And their heads, of course, are still soft. They have their skulls are not fused yet. And so their heads actually swell with it. And what happens is the cerebral spinal fluid that flows around the brain and the spinal cord is not reabsorbed as it should be. Or it's blocked in some way. And this can happen, they found, as people get older, and they don't realize it, and it's not reabsorbed, so it's building up pressure in the brain. Well, our skulls are hard and fused, and so they can't swell with that, and it's just pressing against the brain itself. And so that's what causes the symptoms. And if it's not treated, then it will eventually kill the person. So the shunt is inserted to drain the excess fluid into the abdominal cavity, and it makes just an amazing difference.
Interestingly, after chatting with Tracy, I remembered reading an article in dailycaring.com entitled 7 Treatable Diseases That Mimic Alzheimer's. So I went and reread that article, And amid the 7, there it was at number 5, normal pressure hydrocephalus. The description is included in the article along with these points, and I quote, "In addition to developing dementia-like symptoms, people with MPH could lose bladder control or walk like their feet were stuck to the floor. And if the doctor suspects MPH, a specialist should be consulted as soon as possible. The sooner it's treated, the more likely your older adult will return to full cognitive function." So encouraging. In case you're curious, the other 6 treatable diseases that mimic Alzheimer's are a urinary tract infection, or UTI, medication side effects with anticholinergic drugs, a hospital stay or anesthesia can cause delirium, head traumas, depression, even vitamin deficiency. And I'll add the link to this article in the podcast notes, as it provides a lot more detail than what I'm mentioning here. I hope you found this information helpful. And I do recognize how precious your time is, especially as caregivers. So this mini podcast is designed just for you. And if you find yourself in the midst of your own caregiving journey and need some supports, I invite you to tap into alongside caregiverconsulting.ca. Thanks for listening to this mini podcast, and thank you to Tracy Crump for sharing your caregiving story and for having done your homework so we could all learn from your wisdom and insights gained through your experience as a caregiver. Take care.